Hey, ladies and gentlemen, one of my stress relieving strategies is to travel when I can and take a trip to a neighboring city or a neighboring state. Actually, I'm at the airport right now, and this is a good way to kind of relieve some stress after a week full of seeing patients with demanding wounds, and especially if they have lymphedema, they are harder to treat. So anyway, at this point, I was just reminded of one of the interesting questions that I was asked by a patient last week. A lady asked me, like, I'm a coffee drinker, and I was just wondering if coffee drinking is actually interfering with my wound healing, and that's going to be the point of our discussion today. Don't go away, stay with me. I must tell you that what I'm going to tell you today are not 100% evidence-based, but are based on what we call expert opinion, or what we call anecdotal evidence. So if you're a coffee drinker, or if you're thinking of drinking coffee and you are dealing with a hard healing wound, do not change in any of your regimen or thought process without consulting to your particular provider. Holy moly, it's super hot here right now. But one of the questions that I have been asked lately is that, is coffee beneficial or detrimental to wound healing? My answer will not be 100% evidence-based. It's going to be based on expert opinion. Don't go away. The impact of coffee on wound healing is complex and depends on various factors, including the components of coffee and the overall health of the individual. Here's a breakdown of the potential beneficial and detrimental effects of coffee on wound healing. So here are some potential benefits of coffee in wound healing. Number one is the anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. So coffee is arguably rich in antioxidants, particularly the polyphenols, which can help reduce oxidative stress. Reducing oxidative damage in wounds can potentially support the healing process by minimizing cellular injuries. Number two is that it could improve circulation. Caffeine is a major component of coffee, and it can act as vasodilator, potentially improving blood flow to peripheral tissues. Enhanced circulation can help deliver oxygen, of course, and also nutrients, which are essential for tissue repair and healing. Number three is that, what's that? Number three is there's some poorly appraised paper that I've seen, and they're saying that coffee has antimicrobial effects. Okay, some studies have shown that coffee has mild antimicrobial properties, which may help reduce the risk of wound infection. Infections can significantly impair the healing process, so reducing this risk could be beneficial. Earlier in this blog, I mentioned about the anti-inflammatory, or the claimed anti-inflammatory effects of coffee. In a study conducted by Surma et al., they stated, or they discussed, the anti-inflammatory properties of consuming tea and coffee. In this narrative review, they based on a comprehensive analysis of studies and their meta-analysis, there's inconsistent results that they were able to obtain, and it makes it impossible for them to conclusively state how clinically statistically significant the potential anti-inflammatory properties of black and green tea and coffee are. A number of confounding factors can cause the inconsistencies of the available results, and despite the still uncertain anti-inflammatory effect of tea and coffee, they recommend the consumption as still part of a healthy diet. Now we are done talking about the possible benefits of coffee when you have non-healing wounds. Now we're going to talk about the possible detrimental effects of coffee when you have hard-to-heal wound. So here are the potential detrimental effects of coffee to wound healing. Number one is increased inflammation. While coffee has anti-inflammatory properties, excessive caffeine intake might increase systemic inflammation, which could impair the healing process, especially if the individual already has a condition associated with chronic inflammation. Number two is that dehydration. Caffeine can have diuretic effects, potentially leading to dehydration if consumed in large amounts. Proper hydration is crucial for wound healing as it helps maintain skin trigger, cellular function, and blood circulation to the wound site. Number three is that the interference with sleep. Coffee consumption, particularly later in the day, can interfere with sleep quality, and good sleep is essential for tissue repair and immune function. Poor sleep can prolong the inflammatory phase of wound healing and slow down the overall healing process. Let me move to a different location. It looks like it's very noisy in this location right now. So as we go on with our discussion, there are, let me review some events that's happening during wound healing. Important events includes what we call the proliferation, differentiation, adhesion, and migration. When you say proliferation, that is the production of cells or deposition of connective tissue in order to fill the gap and also to produce the tissue that would resurface the wound. And the other important event that I would like to emphasize is the process of migration. So you know that's the keratinocytes form, or the epithelial cells form at the wound margins, and then they migrate towards the center to resurface the wound. That is when you have a full thickness wound. However, if you have a partial thickness wound where the dermal appendages are still intact, what are the dermal appendages? We have the hair follicles, sebaceous glands, the sweat glands. Okay, those are lined with keratinocytes, and these keratinocytes will migrate from below to the surface of the wound if this is a partial thickness wound, and then they just go ahead and proliferate and resurface the wound. Okay, so now in a study conducted by Ohe et al., they conducted a study to see what is the effect of caffeine on these cellular events. On focus, they were like interested about the migration of keratinocytes or the migration of the epithelial cells, and they have found out in their study that caffeine actually impede these cellular events. So it's contrary to what we think, that it helps in the in closure, and actually they're saying that actually impedes this process. So in other words, in layman's term, caffeine, according to this study, actually has interfered with wound closure. As we go on with our discussion, let me just tell you some important events during wound healing. During wound healing, cell proliferation and migrations are two critical steps that help rebuild the damaged tissue. Here's a simple explanation of these two processes. First is, let's talk about proliferation of cells, or in layman's terms, we call it the growing of new cells. So after an injury, the body needs to create new cells to replace the old that were damaged. Cell proliferation is the process where cells multiply to produce more cells. So what's happening in here? When a wound occurs, certain signals in the body tells the nearby cells like the skin cells, the fibroblasts, and blood vessel cells to start dividing. So the division produces new cells, which are essential for forming new tissue, blood vessels, and the skin that will eventually cover the wound. So why is this event important? Proliferation helps to fill in the gap or the defect caused by the injury. New skin cells help close the wound, while other cells produce collagen and other materials to support the new tissue. The second event is what we call the cell migration. So meaning moving to the wound site. The cell migration is when cells move from one location to another, specifically towards the wound site to help with the repair process. So how is this event happening? After the wound occurs, cells like the keratinocytes. When you say keratinocytes, by the way, that's the main cells in the skin, and also the fibroblasts, which are the cells that make the connective tissue, begin to move towards the wound. That is so as soon as wound occurs. So they follow signals like chemical messengers released by damaged tissues, which guide them to where they are supposed to go. So, for example, they are ready. Our body is has its own mechanism to repair itself, but these cells, they don't know where to go, so therefore they follow a certain signal so that you would know that their direction is towards the wound. Is this migration important? Migration is essential because the new cells need to cover the wound and start building new tissue. For example, skin cells migrate to cover the surface, while the fibroblasts move into the wound to produce collagen, which acts as a scaffold for the new tissue. Now, what's the relevance of all these events to our discussion about the coffee? Ohei et al. Conducted an experiment because he wanted to find out what's the impact of caffeine or coffee to cell proliferation or cell migration during wound healing. And they have found out that caffeine actually impedes both the growth or the proliferation and the migration of these keratinocytes to the wound base. So in other words, in layman's term, they're actually caused, or caffeine or coffee actually delayed the process of healing. So in this study, the authors actually concluded that caffeine actually impede the migration of keratinocytes, so therefore it is actually detrimental to wound healing. That's what they're saying. So what is the relevance of all these events to what we are talking about, or the topic on hand, which is the coffee? To investigate the effects of caffeine on processes involved in wound closure, Ohei et al. Conducted a study to determine the effect of caffeine on the migration of keratinocytes or epithelial cells. By the way, keratinocytes, these are the major cells in our skin. They found that caffeine restricted cell proliferation and migration of keratinocytes in a dose-dependent manner. So That means that it impedes the growth and also the movement of the cells to where's the center of the wound. So in layman's term, or in other words, it's actually offered interference to wound closure. On the other hand, take a watch on this surprise. And don't be surprised if I'm gonna tell you that coffee powder is used as a traditional wound healing option in other part of the world, like in Indonesia. It is claimed to have antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, and antioxidant effects that promote growth of new tissues. Additionally, they are saying that it also has a possible benefits, including the absorption of wound exudates, and also used to treat the all odor in a wound. However, the evidence for the use of coffee powder for healing human wounds is very limited. And these studies actually were at high risk of bias, and there is a need for further research on the effectiveness and implication for using coffee powder before a recommendation could be made on these interventions for treating wounds. So after presenting 2 points of views, what is my personal take? Again, this is not a medical advice, so do not change your lifestyle without consulting your own provider. I'm just telling you my point of view or my own perspective. This is just for entertainment and information purposes only, okay? So my take is moderation is key. For most individuals, moderate coffee consumptions like 1 to 2 cups per day is unlikely to be detrimental to wound healing, and may even have some benefits due to its antioxidants properties. So you also consider individual health status. Okay, people with certain health conditions like those with chronic wounds, diabetes, or high caffeine sensitivity may need to be more cautious with their coffee intake, as excessive consumption could potentially exacerbate inflammation or interfere with overall healing. In summary, moderate coffee consumption may offer some benefits to wound healing due to its antioxidants, but excessive intake could potentially be detrimental, mainly due to its effects on hydration, inflammation, and sleep. I hope you learned something today. Have a great day.